A quiet 49-year-old woman walked out of her home after a minor argument and was never seen again. Her car was later found abandoned miles away with her belongings still inside, but no sign of her. What happened to Janet Renee Field, and why does this case still have no answers more than a decade later? If you found this case disturbing or intriguing, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more real unsolved true crime stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new investigation. Drop your theories in the comments. Every detail matters in cases like this. Janet Renee Field was a 49-year-old woman living in Scottsville, Virginia at the time of her disappearance. Known to family and those close to her as Renee, she shared a home with her husband, Lewis Field, on a secluded 22-acre property. Her life was defined by routine, privacy, and a limited circle of interaction, characteristics that would later shape the course and challenges of the investigation into her disappearance. Family members consistently described Janet as a nice, intelligent, and altruistic person. She was also considered artistic, though details about her daily activities remain minimal. One of the most defining aspects of her personality was her preference for privacy. Janet did not use social media, did not participate in church activities, and was not involved in any community organizations. Her lifestyle was quiet and largely centered around her home. This isolation meant that her interactions with others were extremely limited. Outside of her husband, Janet maintained regular contact primarily with her parents, who lived approximately 90 minutes away in Lexington, Virginia. Her relationship with them was consistent and structured, particularly through a weekly phone call that took place every Monday. According to her father, Ivan Branch, these calls occurred like clockwork and were never missed. This routine provided a clear and reliable pattern of behavior that later became significant when trying to understand her disappearance. Janet's connection to her family extended beyond routine communication. Those close to her emphasized that she was not someone who would leave without informing them. Her cousin, Bridget Cooper Horley, stated that Janet's private nature did not mean she was distant from her family. Instead, it reinforced the idea that any deviation from her normal behavior would be noticeable and concerning. Her marriage to Lewis Field was another central part of her life. While detailed insights into their relationship are limited, it is known that they lived together in relative isolation. The size and seclusion of their property meant there were few neighbors nearby, and even fewer opportunities for casual social interaction. This environment contributed to the lack of external connections that investigators could later rely on. Janet's physical description at the time of her disappearance provides a clear image of her appearance. She stood at approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed between 130 and 160 pounds. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. These details were documented as part of her missing person profile. Overall, Janet Renee Field's life before her disappearance was structured, predictable, and private. Her routines, especially her consistent communication with family, established a baseline of normal behavior. Her limited social circle and secluded living conditions would later present significant challenges for investigators attempting to trace her movements or identify potential witnesses. On June 29, 2014, Janet Renee Field and her husband, Lewis Field, traveled from their home in Scottsville, Virginia to Richmond, Virginia for a shopping trip. This outing is one of the last confirmed activities involving Janet and has been verified through both financial records and cell phone data. These records establish that the couple was together during this time and that Janet's movements were consistent with normal daily activity. The following day, June 30th, Janet made her routine weekly phone call to her parents, continuing a long-established pattern. Her father, Ivan Branch, later confirmed that the conversation appeared completely normal. According to him, Janet did not sound distressed or upset, and nothing in her tone or words suggested any conflict or concern. This interaction is significant because it reinforces the understanding that, at that point, there were no outward signs of disruption in her life. Both the June 29th shopping trip and the June 30th phone call represent the final confirmed indications that Janet's routine remained unchanged. No unusual behavior, statements, or actions were reported during these 2 days. The timeline then advances to July 2nd, 2014. At approximately 1 p.m., Janet and Lewis reportedly had what was described as a minor argument. Following this disagreement, Janet left their residence driving her burgundy 2010 Subaru Forester, bearing Virginia registration WNP2591. This moment marks the last confirmed sighting of Janet. There is no verified information regarding Janet's intended destination or purpose after leaving the home. Investigators have not identified any confirmed plans, appointments, or reasons that would explain where she was going. This absence of information becomes a central issue in understanding her disappearance. Later that same evening, at approximately 11:30 p.m., Lewis contacted Janet's parents by phone. The call was unexpected, as it did not align with Janet's usual communication routine. During the call, he asked whether Janet had arrived at their home. Ivan Branch confirmed that she had not. After the call ended, Ivan attempted to reach his daughter by calling her cell phone. The phone rang, indicating that it was still active, but Janet did not answer. This detail suggests that her phone had not been turned off at that time, though her location remained unknown. On the morning of July 3, 2014, Lewis went to the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office to report Janet missing. This action formally initiated the investigation into her disappearance. On July 4, 2014, 2 days after Janet Renee Field was last seen, her burgundy 2010 Subaru Forester was located at a park and ride in Zion Crossroads, Virginia. The location was approximately 20 miles from her home in Scottsville. This discovery marked the first significant development in the search for her and provided investigators with a physical point of reference in an otherwise uncertain timeline. The vehicle was found parked in a manner that did not immediately suggest distress or urgency. According to investigators, there were no visible signs of forced entry. The windows were intact, and there was no apparent damage to the exterior or interior of the car. There were also no visible signs of violence, such as blood or indications of a struggle. The overall condition led authorities to conclude that the vehicle appeared as though it had simply been driven to the location and left there. Inside the car, authorities recovered several of Janet's personal belongings. These included her keys, her purse, and her cell phone. The presence of these items raised questions, as they are typically carried by an individual rather than left behind. At the same time, it was noted that money and credit cards were not found in the vehicle. Investigators documented this detail but did not assign a definitive interpretation to its significance. Captain David Wells of the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office addressed the handling of potential forensic evidence within the vehicle. Investigators considered conducting DNA testing but ultimately decided against it. The reasoning was based on the expectation that both Janet's DNA and that of her husband, Lewis Field, would naturally be present throughout the vehicle due to regular use. As a result, identifying DNA would not necessarily clarify who had last driven the car or when it had been left at the park and ride. The location of the vehicle itself presented an additional challenge. Janet had no known ties to Zion Crossroads. She did not work in the area, had no known acquaintances there, and had no established routine that would bring her to that location. This absence of connection made it difficult to determine why the vehicle was found there. Her cousin, Bridget Cooper Worley, expressed confusion regarding this detail, noting that Janet's private lifestyle made the location of the car difficult to understand. Investigators also faced limitations in gathering visual evidence. Although the park and ride was described as a semi-busy area, there were few surveillance cameras present. Those that existed were not positioned to capture vehicles entering the lot. As a result, investigators were unable to determine who drove the vehicle to that location or when it arrived there. The discovery of the vehicle provided a focal point for the investigation but did not yield clear answers. Instead, it introduced new questions regarding how and why the car came to be left in a location with no known connection to Janet. Following the discovery of Janet Renee Field's vehicle on July 4, 2014, law enforcement initiated a series of investigative actions aimed at locating her and determining what had occurred. Search operations began promptly, with particular focus on the park-and-ride area in Zion Crossroads where the vehicle had been found. Authorities deployed bloodhounds and cadaver dogs to examine the surrounding wooded terrain. These specialized resources were used to detect human scent trails or indications of human remains. Despite these efforts, no significant evidence was recovered from the area. Investigators expanded their efforts to include a search of Janet's residence in Scottsville, Virginia, as well as the 22-acre property she shared with her husband, Lewis Field. The search was conducted thoroughly and included the use of cadaver dogs to identify any signs that might indicate the presence of human remains. However, these searches did not produce any findings that clarified Janet's whereabouts or provided evidence of what may have happened. As the investigation continued, law enforcement encountered challenges related to Janet's lifestyle. She lived in a relatively isolated setting, and her interactions with others were limited. Neighbors were located at a distance, reducing the likelihood that anyone had observed unusual activity. Additionally, Janet did not maintain social media accounts and had minimal engagement outside her immediate family. According to Captain David Wells of the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office, these factors made it difficult to track her movements or identify potential witnesses who could contribute information. Attention then turned toward Lewis Field as part of standard investigative procedure in missing spouse cases. He was interviewed extensively by authorities regarding the events leading up to Janet's disappearance. Captain Wells stated that investigators were not entirely satisfied with some of Lewis's responses. His demeanor during questioning was described as flat, which made it challenging for investigators to assess his reactions or draw conclusions based on behavior. Lewis also underwent a polygraph examination. The results indicated what investigators described as indicators of deception. However, it is important to note that polygraph results are not definitive proof, and no individual has been officially named a suspect or person of interest in the case. Investigators continued to pursue additional leads as they emerged. 1. Such lead involved a report from a neighbor who claimed to have seen Lewis transporting a refrigerator in the back of his truck after Janet's disappearance. Authorities located the refrigerator at a dump site and examined it, but no evidence of significance was found. Another lead involved an unidentified woman in Texas who had previously had an affair with Lewis. Law enforcement contacted and investigated this individual to determine whether there was any connection to Janet's disappearance. The investigation concluded that the woman was not involved. Throughout the investigative process, authorities documented each step and followed available leads, but none produced conclusive results. The searches, interviews, and examinations conducted during this period did not reveal evidence that could explain Janet's disappearance or establish her location. The disappearance of Janet Renee Field had a profound and lasting impact on her family, particularly her parents, who were closely connected to her through consistent communication and routine. In the months following her disappearance, the emotional strain on the family intensified as they faced uncertainty about her fate. Her mother, Irene Branch, passed away on November 7, 2014, less than 5 months after Janet was reported missing. Her death was attributed to ongoing health issues, but the timing of her passing, so soon after her daughter's disappearance, underscored the emotional toll the situation had taken on the family. Janet's father, Ivan Branch, spoke about the difficulty of losing both his wife and daughter within such a short period. He described the experience as devastating and expressed the lasting impact it had on his life. The absence of answers regarding Janet's disappearance compounded the grief, leaving the family without closure. Other family members also shared their perspectives on Janet's character and the circumstances of her disappearance. Her cousin, Bridget Cooper Worley, stated that Janet's personality and habits made it unlikely that she would have left voluntarily. Family members consistently emphasized that Janet maintained regular contact and would not have disappeared without informing those close to her. These statements reflect a shared belief among relatives that her disappearance does not align with her established behavior. Despite these beliefs, there has been no confirmed evidence to determine what happened to Janet. While some family members have expressed the view that she is no longer alive, this has not been officially confirmed by investigators. The lack of physical evidence or definitive findings has left her status unresolved. The investigation into Janet's disappearance remains active with the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office. Captain David Wells has stated that authorities continue to review the case, examining existing evidence and revisiting prior leads. Efforts have included having additional officers and state police review the case file in order to identify any details that may have been previously overlooked. However, despite these continued efforts, there has been a significant lack of new information. Over time, certain changes occurred in the circumstances surrounding those involved. Janet's husband, Lewis Field, later sold the home they shared in Scottsville and moved to Texas. No conclusions have been officially drawn from this action, and it remains a documented development rather than an interpreted one. As of the present, Janet Renee Field is still listed as a missing person. No suspects or persons of interest have been formally identified in connection with her disappearance. The case remains unresolved more than 8 years after she was last seen. Authorities continue to encourage anyone with information to come forward and contact the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office. The investigation remains open, reflecting an ongoing effort to determine what happened and to provide answers to Janet's family. On the night of July 2, 2014, at approximately 11:30 p.m., Lewis Field contacted the parents of Janet Renee Field to ask whether she had arrived at their home. The call was unexpected and did not follow Janet's usual pattern of communication. Janet typically maintained direct contact with her parents through consistent weekly phone calls, making it unusual for her husband to reach out on her behalf. Under these circumstances, Janet's father, Ivan Branch, confirmed during the call that she had not come to their residence. This information immediately raised concern, as there had been no prior indication that Janet planned to visit. After ending the call, Ivan attempted to contact his daughter directly by calling her cell phone. The phone rang, indicating that it was still active at that time, but Janet did not answer. This detail suggested that her phone had not been turned off, yet her location remained unknown. The situation progressed the following day, July 3, 2014, when Lewis Field went to the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office to file a missing persons report. This action formally initiated law enforcement involvement in the case. At the time the report was received, the circumstances did not immediately appear unusual. According to Captain David Wells, it is not uncommon for individuals to leave home temporarily after a disagreement, and initial reports of this nature are often treated as routine. However, the deputy who initially handled the report quickly recognized that aspects of the situation warranted closer attention. Captain Wells later explained that something about the case did not align with typical scenarios involving voluntary absence. This early assessment prompted a more immediate and focused response from investigators. As law enforcement began evaluating the situation, they considered multiple possibilities, including whether Janet had left voluntarily or whether other factors were involved. Janet's established behavior played a significant role in shaping this assessment. She was known to follow consistent routines, particularly in maintaining regular communication with her family. Her private lifestyle and limited social interactions further contributed to concerns, as there were few alternative explanations for her absence. Investigators began taking initial steps to gather information that could help determine her whereabouts. These efforts included attempts to track her cell phone activity and review financial records, such as credit card usage. Authorities examined these sources to identify any recent transactions or movements that could provide direction. However, these checks did not reveal any activity that helped locate Janet or clarify where she might have gone. Captain Wells later noted that the case quickly shifted from what initially appeared to be a routine missing persons report into a situation that required more extensive investigation. The combination of Janet's consistent behavior patterns and the lack of any traceable activity contributed to increasing concern among investigators. The reporting of Janet's disappearance and the initial response from law enforcement established the foundation for the investigation. From the moment the report was filed, the case began to evolve as authorities worked to understand the circumstances surrounding her absence and determine the next steps in the search for answers. Janet Renee Field lived with her husband, Lewis Field, on a 22-acre property in Scottsville, Virginia. The size and seclusion of this property created significant challenges for investigators after her disappearance. Unlike residential neighborhoods where homes are closely spaced, the distance between properties in this area limited the likelihood that anyone nearby would have observed activity on the day she went missing. According to Captain David Wells of the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office, investigators were unable to rely on traditional canvassing methods. In suburban or urban settings, law enforcement often gathers information by speaking with nearby residents who may have seen or heard something unusual. In this case, neighboring homes were too far apart for such observations to be likely. As a result, there were no meaningful eyewitness accounts that could help establish a clearer timeline of events. Janet's lifestyle further contributed to these challenges. She maintained a highly private existence and had no presence on social media platforms. In many investigations, digital activity can provide valuable insights into a person's recent behavior, communications, and movements. Messages, posts, and online interactions often serve as leads or help establish timelines. However, Janet's absence from these platforms meant that investigators had no digital footprint to examine, removing a common source of information. Her limited social circle also restricted the number of people investigators could interview. Janet did not work outside the home and was not involved in community organizations, religious groups, or other social networks. This meant there were no co-workers, acquaintances, or regular contacts who could offer observations about her recent activities or state of mind. Aside from her immediate family and her husband, there were very few individuals who had consistent interaction with her. Because of this, investigators had limited opportunities to gather information about any changes in her routine or behavior prior to her disappearance. In many cases, friends or colleagues can provide context about recent conversations or events. But in Janet's case, such sources were not available. Her routine was largely confined to her home environment and periodic communication with family members. Her cousin, Bridget Cooper Worley, emphasized that Janet rarely left the house and had minimal social interaction. This characterization reinforced the difficulty in understanding how Janet's vehicle was later found in Zion Crossroads, an area with which she had no known connection. The lack of any established reason for her presence there further complicated the investigation. These factors combined to create a situation in which investigators had very little external information to work with. The absence of witnesses, digital records, and social connections limited the available avenues for inquiry. As a result, the very nature of Janet's quiet and isolated lifestyle became one of the most significant obstacles in efforts to determine what happened to her. According to Lewis Field, the events of July 2, 2014 began with what he described as a minor argument between himself and his wife, Janet Renee Field, around 1 p.m. Following this disagreement, he stated that Janet left their home driving her vehicle. This account represents the last confirmed sighting of Janet and serves as a key point in the timeline established by investigators. As part of standard procedure in missing person cases involving spouses, law enforcement directed immediate attention toward Lewis. Captain David Wells of the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office explained that statistically, spouses are often examined first in such investigations. This approach is routine and does not imply guilt, but reflects common investigative practices. Based on this, Lewis was interviewed extensively regarding his account of the events and his knowledge of Janet's activities. During these interviews, investigators sought to clarify details about the argument, Janet's departure, and any relevant circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Captain Wells later stated that investigators were not 100% satisfied with some of Lewis's answers. The specific nature of these concerns was not publicly detailed, but the statement reflects that certain aspects of his responses did not fully resolve investigators' questions. In addition to the content of his statements, investigators also considered Lewis's demeanor during questioning. He was described as having a flat affect, meaning his emotional responses were limited or difficult to interpret. This made it challenging for investigators to assess his reactions or draw conclusions based on behavioral cues. As part of the investigative process, Lewis agreed to undergo a polygraph examination. The results of this test indicated what authorities described as indicators of deception. It is important to note that polygraph results are not considered definitive evidence and cannot independently establish wrongdoing. Consistent with this, no individual, including Lewis, has been officially named a suspect or person of interest in the case. Investigators also followed additional leads connected to Lewis in an effort to determine whether any relevant evidence could be identified. One such lead came from a neighbor who reported seeing Lewis transporting a refrigerator in the back of his truck after Janet's disappearance. Authorities located the refrigerator at a dump site and examined it as part of their investigation. However, no evidence of significance was found, and the lead did not contribute to determining Janet's whereabouts. Another investigative step involved identifying and contacting a woman in Texas who had previously had an affair with Lewis. Law enforcement conducted an inquiry to assess whether there was any connection between this individual and Janet's disappearance. After investigation, authorities determined that the woman was not involved. In the period following Janet's disappearance, Lewis later sold the home he had shared with her in Scottsville, Virginia, and relocated to Texas. This development was documented by investigators but was not accompanied by any official conclusions regarding its significance. Throughout the investigation, Lewis Field's statements and actions were examined as part of standard procedure. While certain aspects of his responses and behavior were noted by investigators, the case remains unresolved, and no formal determinations regarding his involvement have been made. Following the disappearance of Janet Renee Field, law enforcement immediately initiated extensive search operations aimed at locating her and identifying any physical evidence that could explain her whereabouts. These efforts began shortly after she was reported missing and expanded as new information became available, particularly after her vehicle was discovered in Zion Crossroads, Virginia. Initial search efforts focused on two primary locations: Janet's residence and the surrounding area where her vehicle was found. Investigators conducted a thorough search of the 22-acre property she shared with her husband, Lewis Field. This search included the use of cadaver dogs, which are specially trained to detect human remains. Despite the comprehensive nature of the search, no evidence was discovered that indicated Janet had been present on the property or that any relevant incident had occurred there. Attention then shifted to the park-and-ride location in Zion Crossroads, where Janet's vehicle had been located. Law enforcement deployed both bloodhounds and cadaver dogs in and around this area. Bloodhounds were used to attempt to track scent trails, while cadaver dogs were used to detect any potential biological evidence. These specialized resources are commonly used in missing person investigations to identify leads that may not be visible to the naked eye. In addition to the immediate area of the parking facility, investigators expanded their search into nearby, wooded regions. The rural nature of the surrounding environment made it necessary to examine a wider area, as individuals or evidence could potentially be located outside the immediate parking site. However, despite these expanded efforts, no significant clues were found that could indicate Janet's location or provide direction for further investigation. Another critical aspect of the investigation involved assessing available surveillance footage. Although the park and ride was described as semi-busy, there were only a limited number of cameras in the area. Those that did exist were not positioned in a way that allowed clear observation of vehicles entering or exiting the lot. As a result, investigators were unable to identify when Janet's vehicle arrived or who may have driven it there. Captain David Wells of the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office noted that all available resources were utilized during the search phase of the investigation. He emphasized that authorities conducted thorough and methodical searches across multiple locations in an effort to locate Janet or uncover any physical evidence. Despite these efforts, the results remained negative. The absence of physical evidence created significant challenges for investigators. Without surveillance footage, witness accounts, or forensic findings, the search operations did not produce actionable leads. Each area searched, including the residence, surrounding land, and park and ride vicinity, yielded no findings that could explain Janet's disappearance. Overall, the search operations reflected a comprehensive response using all available specialized resources. However, despite extensive efforts involving trained dogs, ground searches, and attempts to review surveillance data, investigators were left without any physical evidence to determine what happened to Janet or where she might have gone. The investigation into the disappearance of Janet Renee Field has remained open and active within the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office since July 2014. Despite the passage of time, law enforcement has continued to treat the case as an unresolved missing person investigation, with ongoing efforts directed toward reviewing evidence and identifying any new leads that may emerge. Captain David Wells has stated that investigators periodically return to the case file to reassess the information collected during the initial stages of the investigation. This includes re-examining statements, reviewing physical evidence, and considering whether any details may have been previously overlooked. In addition to internal review, the case has also been examined with assistance from other officers and state police resources in an effort to provide fresh perspectives. Despite these continued efforts, the investigation has been marked by a persistent lack of substantive leads. Authorities have received and followed up on various tips over the years, but none have resulted in confirmed breakthroughs or evidence that would significantly advance the case. Each lead has been investigated and ultimately determined not to provide actionable information regarding Janet's location or circumstances. Captain Wells has described the case as odd, reflecting the combination of factors that have made it particularly difficult to resolve. These factors include Janet's highly private lifestyle, the limited number of potential witnesses, the absence of clear physical evidence, and the unexplained discovery of her vehicle at a location with no known connection to her daily life. Together, these elements have created a case that continues to defy clear explanation. The passage of time has also become a defining aspect of the investigation. More than 8 years have passed since Janet was last seen on July 2nd, 2014. During this period, no individuals have been officially identified as suspects or persons of interest. The lack of formal designations reflects the absence of evidence sufficient to support such conclusions under investigative standards. As the years have progressed, the case has remained in an unresolved state, with no confirmed sightings or verified information establishing Janet's whereabouts. The investigative record continues to reflect a missing person status, with law enforcement maintaining that the case is still open and active. Throughout this time, authorities have continued to emphasize the importance of public assistance. The Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office has maintained an appeal for information, encouraging anyone with knowledge related to Janet's disappearance to come forward. Contact information has been made available for individuals who may have relevant details that could assist in the investigation. The case remains defined by its lack of resolution. Despite sustained investigative efforts, ongoing review of evidence, and continued public appeals, no definitive answers have been reached. Janet Renee Field remains listed as a missing person, and the investigation continues in the hope that new information may eventually provide clarity.